Okay, so we are gonna start. So hi everyone, welcome. Please, can you go to the next slide, please, Evelyn? Okay, please sign in your name and pronounce your district and what is your favorite holiday tradition? If you can share that in the chat, that will be awesome.
Favorite holiday tradition?
Yes. Like mine, I will say I love movies and board games with the kids during the holidays. So please feel free to share yours. Yes, Amanda, eating. Yes, I love food. I'm with you. Michelle, thank you. Yep, time with family. Molly, yes, time with family. Christmas music and playing. Yes, Stephanie. Holly, yes, decorating trees. That's awesome. Tanya, yes, being with families. Colombo Zulite, Amy, yes. Alexandra, your niece, and before Christmas. I love that. Those are awesome. That's great. And we are still admitting people in and keep sharing, please. That is awesome. So since we only have 1 hour today, I'm going to get us started. Let's go through some quick housekeeping. Zoom logistic here. If you're not speaking, please mute your microphone to avoid background noise. Questions can be asked throughout the training by using the chat box at the bottom of your screen. The link for today's material will be shared in the chat box and will also be available on the COHHIO website at cohhio.org/homelesseducation. And we will be using breakout rooms today during the session for our discussion. And if you are experiencing any audio or video issues, just exit and log back in. Okay? Awesome. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, here's our roadmap for today's agenda. We will introduce our new director, provide you with an overview of transportation requirements, have discussion among peers on transportation plan and collaboration, and provide some best practices on developing, maintaining, and sustaining transportation for students experiencing homelessness to support the work that you do. And we will wrap up by sharing some upcoming webinars, what is next for COHHIO Course to Home, and share some additional resources. Okay, COHHIO Course to Home team. As you already know, I'm Ami Diallo, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Evelyn Guerin, and our wonderful team at the Ohio Department of Education, Susan Whalen and Ashley Huser, who are always here to support you. And now we are thrilled to introduce to you our new Housing Initiative Director, Amanda Wilson. Amanda, the floor is all yours if you want to say a few words.
Thank you. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm just excited to be here. I've been at COHHIO a long time. I worked in data administration for HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System. I also worked in coordinated entry for the continuum of care for the 80 county balance of state. I've also done some direct service back in the day. I'm a trained social worker. And so really excited to support all of you in any way that I can and to learn from you about your communities. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And now Evelyn is going to take the stage for us. Evelyn, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Ami. So I'm going to start off our presentation today by quickly going over the transportation requirements under McKinneyVento and some considerations for providing those services before we get into our first discussion. So the law requires that every state and its school districts adopt policies and practices to ensure that transportation is provided to students experiencing homelessness. And this is an effort to support educational success and student stability. So this includes transportation to and from their school of origin and also applies to district administered public preschool programs. McKinneyVento additionally requires school districts to eliminate barriers to full participation in school activities, which includes the ability to participate in extracurriculars So districts also have to consider transportation needs to and from these extracurriculars for students experiencing homelessness as well. And last but not least, liaisons also have a responsibility to ensure that parents and guardians and unaccompanied youths are all aware that they have a right to these transportation services and are assisted in accessing these services. So diving deeper into transportation requirements, if a student experiencing homelessness continues to live within the same district as their school of origin, but is maybe living in a different school zone, then transportation to and from school of origin must be arranged and provided by that district. But if a student experiencing homelessness begins living in an area served by another district, but remains enrolled in their school of origin, then both districts involved have to agree upon a method to distribute transportation responsibilities and costs. Students experiencing homelessness have the right to remain in their school of origin for the duration of their homeless episode or for the remainder of the academic year if the student becomes permanently housed. So districts need to consider what is in the best interest of the student in determining which school a student experiencing homelessness should attend. McKinneyVento presumes that remaining in the school of origin is in the best interest of the student, and that's often because students have pre-existing connections and supports that can provide stability and keep them engaged in school. However, it is possible that remaining in the school of origin may not be in the student's best interest, so each situation should be determined on an individual basis. Factors that districts should consider when making these determinations might include the student's age. Is the student at a point in their academic career where moving schools would be really disruptive? The safety of the student. Is there a reason why one district might be a safer option for a student than another? And graduation requirements and whether or not that student is on track for graduation, or considering whether credits from one district will transfer to another. So these are all just really things that districts should be thinking about when making these determinations. It's also important to note that there are no time or distance limits under McKinneyVento. Distance and travel time should not be factored into these determinations unless it would impact the achievement, education, health, and safety of the student. The mode of transportation provided to students experiencing homelessness is ultimately determined at the district level, but it's important to ensure that the mode of transportation provided doesn't create any additional barriers to the student's education. This means that transportation arrangements should ensure participation in the full school day, neither making students arrive late to school or picking them up before the school day has ended. It also means making sure that transportation arrangements don't stigmatize or reveal students' living situations. For example, bus routes should be arranged so that students staying in a temporary shelter could be picked up first and dropped off last on their routes, so their temporary residence isn't revealed to their peers. Stigmatization can discourage students from attending school, so it's really important to ensure that services provided for students experiencing homelessness protect their confidentiality. There are several considerations districts should make when arranging transportation plans, the first and foremost being student safety. If a transportation plan calls for a student to utilize public transportation, for example, then districts should ensure that the student is mature enough to ride on their own or has the company of a parent or guardian. It's also important to note that the McKinney-Vento Act does not override Ohio Department of Education safety policies or your own school district safety policies. So if your school district, for example, allows students to travel only on yellow school buses, then students experiencing homelessness can also only travel on yellow school buses. Considerations for transportation will also be different depending on your district's geographic location. Urban districts might rely on public transportation for students experiencing homelessness, and they can do this by providing free bus passes or discounts, or partnering with public transit authorities so students can use their school IDs in lieu of specific transportation passes. Rural districts, on the other hand, have their own unique transportation challenges, and this might look like a lack of access to public transportation or increased travel time between districts. So rural districts might need to consider more creative approaches, such as forming a transportation consortia with neighboring districts to pool resources regionally.
Ooh, consortia, I never heard of.
Districts could also consider unique ways to divide transportation responsibilities, such as transporting students to the school district's boundary where they meet the neighboring district's transportation service, or having one district cover the morning and the other district cover the afternoon. There are really a lot of ways that districts can go about this, but the most important consideration in developing any of these arrangements should be the safety and the best interest of the student. The McKinney-Vento Act also states that homeless students have the right to services comparable to those offered to other students. Therefore, districts should provide students experiencing homelessness with transportation services equivalent to those provided to permanently housed students. So for example, if transportation during summer school is provided to all students, then districts are required to provide that service to students experiencing homelessness as well. So before we get into our first discussion today, I wanted to show you all the results from this session's registration poll, which asked about your district's transportation capacity on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being low capacity and 5 being high capacity. And the results show that about 50% of you chose 3, which would be right in the middle, which I took as you feeling like you have some of the necessary systems and policies in place, but maybe not access to all of the necessary resources to best provide these services. About a quarter of you also chose 1 and 2, which tells me that maybe you've been struggling with driver shortages and a lack of other resources. And another quarter of you chose 4 and 5s, which is great to see that you feel your capacity for providing these services is still so strong despite the shortfalls that many districts have faced over the last couple of years. So this is just to say that transportation in general has been a challenge for districts across the state in recent years. So whatever challenges you might be facing in your district, you are not alone. And that's also why we've all come together today so that we can learn from each other and continue to find innovative strategies to combat these issues. So now that we've gone over transportation requirements, we're going to have a discussion about current challenges that your district is facing in meeting these requirements and considerations for addressing these challenges. We're going to give you 12 to 15 minutes in breakout rooms to go over these questions. I also encourage you to take a picture of these questions before going into your breakout room so you have access to them. We're going to broadcast them in the chat, but this way you'll be ready for conversation right when you get in there. So here are the questions we'd like you to discuss in breakout rooms. What challenges is your district facing in providing transportation services to students experiencing homelessness? Does your district have any safety policies that must be considered when developing transportation plans? And what is your district's current process for determining transportation plans for students experiencing homelessness? So I'm going to give you a second to take a picture of that before I stop sharing. Welcome back. So you start coming back in. We'd love if some of you would be willing to share some of the things that came up in your breakout rooms, either in the chat or by unmuting yourself. All right, looks like, oopsies, keep doing that.
Looks like we almost have everyone back.
Yeah. So is anyone willing to come off mute or share in the chat anything they took away from their breakout rooms related to these 3 questions?
Hi, Don.
Oh, I moved my mouse and it had a hand there and I was like, how did I raise my hand? Oh, sorry about that. So I mean, our group was really interesting. So, I mean, I think, you know, like with I'm sure the rest of the groups, like lack of drivers for the first question. And then one person in our group, their school purchased vans. But again, you know, there's no drivers. So that is kind of the overall problem. And then another person mentioned that the large area, you know, it's still, you know, having the people to transport and then the cost for the to transport even 1 or 2 students, if you hire that out, is pretty high. And then the second question, the safety procedures are in place. One of the things talked about was they had a case. Obviously, you want to do it for the best interest of each child. But Penny Boggs had talked about how they had a case where they had a homeless youth that would have actually, because it's such a rural area, they would have had to transport this child across state line to stay in a hotel. And I was just like, wow, we live in the mid, you know, our district's in the middle of the state. So that would be something we wouldn't have to face. So that really brings up some thoughts. So I was really glad she shared that, because that was like, oh my gosh, you have a driver who transports a youth and then they're going to a hotel. Those are some really scary things that you would really have to think about. So that brought in another emergency placement. I didn't write that down. I'm sure she could share it. And then the last question was obviously barriers to access school, talking about getting the transport set up immediately and like doing reimbursement if the parents can transport. It was a really, really good conversation. So I don't know if anybody in the group wants to add to that.
I got partially interrupted by a phone call, but as far as challenges go, the contracted companies that we use sometimes are inconsistent. Drivers aren't trained in any kind of trauma or anything like that care. Oftentimes, just perhaps because of the company that we are using. I'm sorry, Lavonda, let me call you back in just a second. Okay. Train of thought. So they don't necessarily speak English either, and so it can be kind of awkward for some of our kids, the younger one especially. So, and then they add lots of kids to different routes. Sometimes the kids don't get along, so there's problems on the van sometimes. So even very highly paid companies that we use are sometimes not that great. And then of course there's the usage of the vans where some of our high school students just decide not to go that day, and so we get charged anyway. And then there's also, of course, frequent moving. So those are all challenges that I face multiple times in a week. So I that's it.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, Don and Andrew. Those are definitely great challenges. How we can support you with like some best practices. Anyone wants to share some more? Scott? Yep.
Oh, I don't mean to be trite. I just think we're still in a place where, and somebody mentioned that, drivers are scarce, and certainly so is the funding. But I still believe that a lot of administrators, a lot of transportation directors and so forth aren't really well versed in what the law and the mandates are in McKinneyVento. I'm not so sure in some cases that maybe they do know and pretend not to know. But I think sometimes there's a lot of begging, borrowing, stealing, and negotiating where the law should be clear about whose responsibility is what. But it's just a thought.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Scott. Anyone would like to share some more? Even in the chat. Oh, I think we have something in the chat. Okay, from Penny, we developed an emergency housing plan in a flow chart form. I created a template and shared it with our liaison who were then able to adapt it for the individual district need. That's great, Penny. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else? Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, this next part will take us into everything that you just shared, and we will discuss some collaboration. Yes, Evelyn, would you like to move to the next slide, please? So let's talk about some collaboration, okay? When school, like you guys already talked about it in your discussion room, when school districts are arranging transportation across school district lines, both districts must work together to determine how to share transportation responsibilities and cost, right? And Here are some best practices for collaborations that we included for you, like agreeing upon guidelines for sharing transportation responsibilities and the cost of transporting students experiencing homelessness ahead of time, and reviewing these guidelines annually will eliminate confusion and conflict when transportation needs need to be arranged for a student experiencing homelessness. So have these guidelines ahead of time, okay? Organizing joint regional McKinneyVento training for all personnel involved in transportation arrangements. I think it was Scott who was just mentioning how people were not informed about the law and things like that. So I think having those trainings for all school personnel involved is necessary to support these students experiencing homelessness and with all these issues that we're having with transportation. Convening annual regional meetings to discuss policies and procedures and revise them as needed because things change, right? For example, some of these discussion options can be about what is the most efficient way to support these students experiencing homelessness. Have this discussion, reach out to one another, work together, because one thing might work for one district and it's not working for the other district. By collaborating and talking about it, we can always come up with solutions about what's best, what works best for these students. Next slide, please. So we all know, we're talking about it, that transportation is a core support for students experiencing homelessness, right? And local liaisons are encouraged to establish collaborative relationship with community agencies that serve students and families experiencing homelessness. We know that community-based organization can play a unique and valuable role in providing transportation for students. So what can they do? They can provide short and long-term funding to help absorb shortage and create a sustainable support for transportation. Sharing resources such as shelter and social service agencies. I know somebody mentioned about the van. For example, there's this school district in Wisconsin, La Crosse, Wisconsin, that is partnering with like Boys and Girls Club and the local YMCA. So what they're doing, those community partners actually are supplying the stuff. I know somebody was saying that sometimes the problem is the drivers, right? So these, how you call it? Community organization can supply the stuff for you, and even those vans that they have can help transport your students. So reach out to them and see how you can work things out, right? Donating bus passes or other transportation services will help like these students have options available in case, let's say if you're in urban, I know when it comes to the rural, and with the buses, that's complicated, but that's an option that you can have if you are in urban cities. And all these supports that we are like collaboration are so essential in reducing any additional barriers and giving stability to these students. So collaboration is a must. So just reach out and see how you can work together and support these students. Next slide, please. Okay, so parents experiencing homelessness, we all know, are generally very appreciative when they included in decisions involving their child's education and transportations. So we encourage liaison to ensure that parents have a clear understanding of their role in carrying out their child transportation plan and can consider even developing a written agreement for holding both parties accountable, right? Such as committing to getting the kid to the bus stop on time, notifying the transportation department when a kid is not attending school, right? All that avoid a unnecessary trip for these drivers, because you don't want the driver to go all the way to that place and the kids is not there, the parents have not called. So make sure you have these agreements in place. And also, some districts may choose to utilize the family's own car. I think somebody also mentioned that how sometimes they use like families for mode of transportation. But we were talking also about reimbursement. We have to reimburse family for all transportation expenses. incurred during to and from school, like those round trip, okay? And we also have to be aware that these families and youth experiencing homelessness might not have money for gas or other transportation expenses, right? Because they're waiting for reimbursement. So it's really important that we provide this gas card upfront to avoid any added stress. And also one thing about, we all know that the reimbursement is at the discretion of the district or the ESC, but we gotta keep in mind that it should be comparable to transportation reimbursement provided to your own staff, or district may also use the federal mileage rate, right? There's a specific calculation based on mileage and the cost of gas, okay? So, here's some professional development. For many students experiencing homelessness, you all know here, school is the only place for stability in their lives, right? And in order for us to help them meet their unique needs, we encourage that all parties involved in student transportation, including bus driver, should be familiar with the McKinneyVento Act and how to identify students experiencing homelessness. Everyone can make a difference, okay? Bus drivers are uniquely positioned to identify those students experiencing homelessness because sometimes they are most of the time the first and last person to interact with these students over the course of the day. For example, they can observe changes on when and where students get on and off the buses. So they can go and talk to the liaison, hey, so-and-so, this is where I dropped them off today, and so last time, this is where I picked them. So that makes it easier to identify them and help them out. So now that we've gone through collaboration, we're gonna go back in the breakout room and have some discussion about the current challenges in your district. And please, as Evelyn says, please take a picture, okay, of these questions, but we will make sure we broadcast them as well. And if you can like identify one person to report out, that would be wonderful. And here's are the questions. Where might there be opportunities for collaboration when it comes to providing transportation for students experiencing homelessness? That's the first question. The second question is, how does your district involve parents and guardians in determining modes of transportation? And the last question is, what does your process of inter-district coordination look like? Okay, so we're gonna give you another 12 to 15 minutes and come back and discuss it. And if you have any questions, let's try to work together and solve that. Back and some great discussions in your breakout rooms. We are gonna go through these a little quicker because we are running on time right now. So if anyone would like to share, and also any questions in the chat box, if you would like to stay maybe 1 or 2 minutes after this presentation so you can have your question answered, that would be great. So anyone wants to share or put it in the chat box, what you've discussed about collaboration? Lisa, are you? Oh, okay.
I'll ask.
Okay.
Just quickly, I feel like a lot of questions today have been asked as if we are in a position to have more impact over transportation than I think we actually do. I've done training with bus drivers. I've tried to inform and work with transportation directors about who their potential McKinneyVento eligible students may be in need of transportation. But I have no authority under my position, no place under my position to deal with the kinds of collaboration and planning and all of that with transportation that we've been talking about. So I feel as though our time is more spent with trying to be true to what McKinneyVento expects of us in terms of identification. But once we've identified those students and kind of handed them over to school districts. I don't know that we have that influence to do any of the deeper kind of planning and organization and all of that we've been calling for today.
Thank you, Scott. That's a great question. Have you maybe one thing that I was thinking about is having this conversation maybe during with transportation directors during the breaks to prepare for the next school year if it's not happening right now. Is that something that maybe you can plan on?
I put out tons of information, newsletters. I've done some training with bus drivers, and some directors have shown up. But I don't know that I can say, all right, let's all get together and talk about within the counties I work with. I suspect I might get a huge, who do you think you are kind of response.
Susanna, do you have anything to add to that, of something that he might actually do if he feels like he's not comfortable enough to have those conversations?
Sure. So Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're in the role at the ESC, correct?
Yes.
So you're,
yes.
yeah, so you're uniquely positioned and different than our typical liaisons who are, in a district and are required to communicate with the transportation folks. So as far as your role in the ESC, it would be, again, to impart this information to the local liaison and then encourage them to set up ways to communicate with the transportation directors. We always say that it's not the liaison's job to set up transportation because it is complicated and requires a lot of knowledge of ORC. So, the intent of this, the intent of this conversation really is to understand the challenges and then talk together about how do you facilitate communication with your transportation director or your transportation folks? How do you facilitate the billing or the bill back and things like that? So hopefully that's helpful.
It is, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Scott. Okay, Evelyn, do you want to go really quick? I don't think Evelyn will have enough time, but you can have this information on the slides that will be shared with you as follow-up and also in the chat box.
Yes, so really quickly, I'm just going to show you what we're going to talk about in these slides, but as Ami mentioned, you have access to these after the fact. So, oopsies. Obviously, driver shortages are an issue. The Ohio Department of Education has created a wonderful resource called the Driver Shortage Playbook, which details different strategies school districts can try out in addressing these challenges. So I'm not going to go into detail about this, but this slide kind of summarizes that entire playbook, and that playbook is linked in the resources. So please take a look at that after this session if that's a challenge your district is facing. In terms of funding, this slide kind of just covers some of the routine funding sources that you can use for transportation and also the challenges and considerations for using American Rescue Plan funds for transportation. So please look at this if you have any questions about which funds are allowable for which services, and if you ever are unsure about allowable uses for ARP funds, ODE is always a great resource and can guide you on what is or is not an allowable cost. And last but not least, I just wanted to provide a quick example of a school district that was able to use ARP funds creatively. New Philadelphia School District had a high population of
Hello, everybody. How are you? Good. How are you?
English learners and unaccompanied youth. Who were living with sponsors and were often in doubled up situations. And New Philadelphia only provides transportation if students live over a mile away from school, but many of these students were living just inside the school's walk zone, which put them about like a 9/10 of a mile away from school. And this walking distance was a huge barrier to attendance for these students. So to combat this, New Philadelphia used their ARP funds to purchase bicycles for these students living in these zones, which would take them less time to get to school than the walk would have taken. And they even went as far as purchasing different types and colors of bikes to ensure that these bikes weren't any indication of homelessness to their peers and to avoid that stigmatization that we talked about earlier. So it's a very brief summary of that unique example of a way ARP funds can be used to address transportation. And you can read more about that in some of the resources that are linked at the end of these slides as well. So I'm going to pass it back to Ami so she can close us out. Thank you so much for being here.
I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And our next session will be on Valentine's Day next year, February 14. And please keep an eye out for the announcement about that next year. And coming soon, we also in the process of developing the COHHIO Course to Home Toolkit to support district in meeting these needs, and also an e-learning center for professional development of liaison and all school personals. And please, as always, we greatly appreciate if you can give your feedback about today's session, because we are always trying to make this session even more impactful and worthwhile to you. So please share your thoughts with us. We truly appreciate you. And last but not least, we are also looking for ways to always spotlight your district in doing the fantastic work that you are doing in these in your communities. And also we want to share those fantastic work in our newsletter and also during this community of practice session. So please make sure if your district is doing amazing things to share that with us, and I will also share the links with you, and it's also available on the slides. Okay, and also we have compiled some additional resources for you on developing, maintaining, and sustaining transportation. Everything that we just discussed, you can have some more additional resources right here. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stay at the end, and we can give, like, we have a few minutes to respond to those questions. Happy holidays, happy new year, and see you next year. Thank you for all the work that you do. We appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Can I ask a question?